So just to get started, a little bit about me. So Sean mentioned this earlier, but the content management area is definitely near and dear to my heart. So I founded a company in 1999 with some other guys called Clickability, which was a SaaS web content management platform. So we were in the market during the time that content management went from being a IT product to being one that was specifically built to serve marketers. And like all companies, we had our arch nemesis. That company was called Crown Peak. That company had this loudmouth CMO named Robert Rose. So we've been in the marketplace together before in the past. And Clickability, went its own way. We were, you like that? Yeah. Exactly. And then in about 2013 is when I was all wrapped up with Clickability. Had the time, bought a minivan after selling Clickability. That's literally what we did after selling Clickability. We had some kids we had to carry around and started to figure out what was next for me. And what was next for me was going back to everything I had learned from working with enterprise marketers during that decade of being associated with content management and really reflecting on the challenges that we had seen there and that we continue to just see over and over with our customers. And that's where the foundation of Akunu came from. So Akunu is my new company. I've been at this for about 2 years now. And I think the best way to succinctly describe Akunu is that we're really focused on how to scale account-based selling, where account-based selling encompasses both the marketing function and the sales function. So we have 2 products, one for marketing, one for sales. We have some banners around and happy to tell you all about it. But we set out to solve some of these challenges that we saw marketers having in the B2B environment in terms of understanding the audience, translating that into business results. We have a great advisory board. This is one of our esteemed members. His name is Robert Rose.
Are they related?
So, yeah, and that brings us here to MuraCon. And I have a great job as CEO of Akunu. I love my job. Like every day, I am fired up to be there, work with my team, work with Kathleen, who's part of the team. It's a hard job. So as CEO of an early stage company, you have to hold 2 things in your hands at the same time and in your head at the same time. One is, having the vision for how this is going to be a billion-dollar company and how we're going to achieve that and convince people of that. And the other hand is like, how are we going to get our first 10 customers on the new product? Like, how are we going to actually execute here? So my hope with this presentation is to kind of bridge those worlds together, to talk about a lot of these themes, a lot of these concepts and trends, which we've heard about. Great presentations from Robert and Carla and Arda, awesome. You can always tell when there's good presentations when before yours you go in and start editing your slides to account for it. So well done. And help bridge that actually into how do we actually operate here? Let's pull these concepts down into some frameworks, into some tools that actually allow us to achieve business results. Which brings us to the topic. So how to really drive an experience-based go-to-market strategy. So the first thing is really understanding what's a go-to-market strategy, right? So this is that combination of 3 things. The first is your product, what you're actually offering. I actually can't help you with that. I'd love to talk about it, but you guys know your businesses, your products, what they are there to do in your audience. It's understanding who are your buyers, and really importantly, how the buyers buy, right? So those things come together. That's your go-to-market strategy, which is really geared at one thing. It's geared at getting to the revenue, being successful, selling the product, building a business around it. And the role of the digital experience today is at the forefront of how this happens, right? This is what connects from your strategy, how you engage with that audience to deliver a business result. Okay? So the first thing to really think about here is, how do you make this count? You guys are, I believe most of you are marketers, maybe some other functions here, right? You guys work really hard. You have a lot that you're doing, day in, day out. How do you make sure that this really counts? How do you make sure you're hitting things in the right way to drive to the results? And this is hard. This is a hard environment that we're in right now. There's been a shift that's happened here. So companies do not sell products anymore. Today it's buyers who buy products. They're in charge of how they choose to learn about products. They choose how and when to engage with companies. And what they expect? They expect great content. They expect great experiences every way along their path to selecting a solution and making a purchase. And if you don't do that, you're just not even in the consideration. You might not even know about those opportunities that you missed because there was some disconnect early on in their experience with you. And to really fulfill this, it's a new approach, right? It's a new approach that's needed to marketing in the marketplace. And it's not the traditional vendor-centric point of view. It's not about your products first and your company second. It has to be about the buyer. The buyer is at the center of the world. Okay? So it's about understanding their needs, delivering with their preferences for how they engage with you, and fulfilling their needs that move them along with exploring their business challenges and how to solve them. Now, this might sound like an easy thing. Oh, yep, got it, buyer-centric. So we started working with a big life sciences company 2 years ago, about $4 or $5 billion company. And this idea of becoming buyer-centric was like their number one aspirational thing as a marketing team, because they were all about the box, right? They're all about the product. New content was all about new features to talk about the product. And this has taken about 18 months of real concerted work there, where finally I can feel comfortable in saying that some of them are buyer-centric, right? Like big team, big culture, but really critical. And we can start to think about what that means and how to understand the audience. So I'm going to start with the more consumer type of purchase. This is foundational to understanding the B2B, which is, how does someone make a purchase decision? How does someone decide if they want socks or Uggs, for their bare feet? And they're going to start going through a sequence of activities. They're going to be looking at different sources of content, looking at social media, looking at the web, all leading to the point where it's like, okay, got it, I'm going to buy this product. So if we apply this to the business buyers, immediately there's something different here, right? We've got 5, 6 people involved instead of just one. But each one of these people has been informed about how they make purchase decisions. So they're all out there doing research, understanding the products, taking things from their point of view because they play different roles there. Now we're starting to interact with salespeople as well at some point. So a lot of different types of interactions. And if you try to make sense of this like you could with that kind of transactional journey, it's really hard. It's a mess, right? And as a marketing person or as a salesperson, you're really left understanding, left wondering, hey, what's actually going on here? And more importantly, what can I do as a marketing practitioner or as a salesperson to move this forward to that business result we're looking for? And this is only getting harder. Ardis shared some statistics around the buying committee. There's lots of different ones out there. The one I'm using today is, the size is increasing to the 5.4 people on the buying committee now. Maybe that's just the core buying committee, but if you think of the entire group around those buyers who have some level of influence, it's going to be even more and more. And along with that is the fact that group size matters in making decisions, right? So if you are the only person in charge of making a decision, 81% of the time, you'll make a decision for something, right? 19% of the time, maybe you'll decide to do nothing. But just throw one other person in the mix there, oops, and you're down to almost 50%, right? Now, my theory here is then when you add the third person in, you have the tiebreaker, which allows you to make the next decision. When you hit the fourth person, one of the 4 doesn't really care about it, so you still have the tiebreaker. And then when you get to 5, you have factions. Now you have 3 against 2, and then from there, it just goes downhill. So if you take this 5.4 and put into a little chart over there, you're in this kind of precipice, point where the decision-making capability really drops, okay? So that's why it's so important to be able to understand the audience, understand the buyers and how they buy. So now we'll start to get into actual frameworks for this level of understanding. And the starting point is thinking about market segmentation, okay? So if you are a company and you're selling even one product, chances are that you are selling to more than one, segment, more than one industry, perhaps the size of company that matters for you. And the market segments was really the idea that companies that are within a market segment share a similar way that they go about buying products and behaving through the sales process. So all your little financial institutions will do roughly the same thing in their purchase decisions, highly compliant industry, so they'll have steps they have to go through there, versus maybe your high tech versus maybe your healthcare, right? So this becomes a starting point for understanding the audience, because I guarantee talking to, say, the CIO of a financial services company is very different than talking to the CIO of an entertainment company or a shipping company. Just different concerns, a different environment, a different context that they're coming from. So that's the first part. And then within each one of these market segments, you have the actual people involved in the purchase decisions, the buyer personas, as Arith mentioned earlier. So these are representing the typical roles, the typical people that are in the decision making. And you can look at them based on their functional area and their titles and their role in the buying group and so on. And there's lots of different ways of going about, I shouldn't say that. There are different ways that people choose to kind of designate who these personas are. And there's some good ways and there's some not as good ways. Like just thinking about people as their titles and that's your persona, that's not really a persona. Thinking about buyer personas is really a depth of understanding about the typical person in that role and the function that they are serving in that organization and in the purchase making. So, common things that you would really want to see in your buyer persona. So it's things that go beyond just the demographics, right? Just beyond the title and their functional duties into their goals and initiatives. What are they really trying to accomplish? As people, what's the typical director of marketing really looking to do? Chances are there's probably some aspirational ones who want to move up to be that VP or to move laterally within a marketing organization. Understanding those things help you really deliver compelling content to the people. Understanding the solution fit for them. How does our product benefit this role, right? That value proposition, as Arith walked us through with her example, very different for the IT guy, versus the actual business owner. And kind of down through the list here. Okay? So there's lots of great resources on persona development out there. I'll talk about the process a little bit more, but great frameworks to use. I mean, Arith is one of the world experts on this, so of course you could just ask her today as well. Okay, and then the next part is, we just took care of the who the buyers are. Now we're going to talk about the how and start to talk about the buyer's journey. So at its highest level, the buyer's journey is the path that this group of people go through to make a purchase decision. So I think I have, 4 or 5 stages up here. What you call your stages, this is all, depends on the terminology you like to use. How many stages you have should map the type of purchase that's happening, should actually map how your buyers are purchasing. So this is part of that discovery of doing your work and uncovering the buyer's journey and defining it. In this example, we choose to have 4 stages leading up to the purchase, but that's not where their buyer's journey stops. It keeps going. Implementing the product, proving the value of the product, being an owner of that product over an extended period of time. So it definitely goes on more than just the front here. And then it's also thinking about, each of these buyers, as individuals, but also as part of a team, right? So they're going to move through it. We tend to use, we're a product company, we tend to use icons to represent things. So this starts to get into the idea of the level of participation that each of the personas has each step of the way here. So you have folks who, they start as the driver of activities. This is our warehouse manager in our actual example. It's her pain that she's looking to solve, and she's the one who's going to go out and start to really research how do we overcome this. Whereas someone like our CEO or CFO, they might not be involved at the beginning. They come in at some later time where maybe they come in as a participant, so they start to pick up what's going on. But then at some point they become the gatekeeper, right? So there's an ebb and flow here, of what's happening with these individuals, them coming into the journey, maybe stepping out of the journey, things that have to happen together as a team before they move forward, versus things that just the individuals are kind of checking off their own list along the way. And to make this even richer, this isn't like a flat journey. There's actually some depth here, so we'll kind of zoom in. And at each one of these stages, with each one of these personas and with the group, to really understand how the buyers are buying, you have to understand these things. You have to understand, what are their buyer needs at this point. And needs can be the things they're asking you. Like, it's great if the buyers are asking you the things they need. Fantastic. Could be informational. Could be, oh, we've got that content. But this could be things that you have no visibility into. Their internal alignment needs. Their internal requirements development needs, right? But these are really critical to understand. So think about that. If you know that, we'll just call it, in the second stage of the buyer's journey, your prospects are typically sitting down and doing a requirements definition process. That's like magic insight, because now as a marketing team, you can say, okay, let's put together our version of what a requirements document should look like for this kind of product, and we'll give it to them so that we are top of mind, when they are doing this part of their buyer's journey. So that's what, this level of detail allows you to get to in terms of buyer's needs. Again, informational, could be political, could be relationship, and so on. Understanding their barriers to moving forward. My gosh, we just can't move forward until the CFO gives us budget approval for next year. Okay, that's a good, relevant piece of information to know as you're thinking about deals and forecasting them. And then the preferences and activities that the different personas follow in their journey here. Do they like long-form content? Do they like social content? Do they like videos? Are they typically doing all the research themselves, or do they like to go to industry events to learn? These are all the kind of things to uncover, in the investigation of these personas that lead to being able to effectively market to them. So if we go back to our original point here, which is to get from our go-to-market strategy, over to the money, we've kind of filled this out, right? So our products are related to what you're selling in your lines of business. Your personas are the who. The buyer's journeys are the how. So now we have to figure out how to get them over there, right? How to move them forward. And this is now when we actually start to talk about, you guys a little bit more, about the company. We've been talking about the buyer and their journey so far. And this is something that we call orchestrating the revenue journey, which is really bringing these worlds together. Bringing together the world of the buyers. Okay, so there's our account, right? That's making a purchase decision in our 5 personas. Here we have their journey, roughly the same words we had in the previous slide representing, the stages they go through to become a customer. We have the path that they go through, how these guys kind of ebb and flow through the journey. We've got our little CFO who's lurking around in the background here until he jumps out at the end with his own needs, his own things that need to be fulfilled to move forward. So there's the buyer side. But hey, you're a company, you're a marketing and a sales team, and you're working together. Oops, we'll come back to that. You're working together to run your process, how you market and how you sell. We have our, marketing qualified accounts, all the way through the stages of the sales process. And what's happening in the middle here is all those touch points, right? So they used to be all over those people's pictures. Now we're starting to get organized here, where there are touch points that are happening with these individuals, throughout the buying journey. If we had a really traditional mindset, we'd love to think that all the marketing touches in orange, all kind of sit up at top here. And then you hand off the leads to the sales team, and then all the blue sales activities, lead it down to a close. But we know that's not how people buy. We know that's not how companies buy solutions. There are marketing touch points from beginning to end to renewal to like entire life cycle for this customer. There are sales activities that could start with the conversation at a trade show booth and then circle back a year later, right? So it's totally intermingled. It is content rich with the availability of the different channels that buyers have to consume content through. And you can't lose sight of like the sales team as a primary channel of the content you create. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. So what allows you to really be successful here is the ability to map these things together, right? So we have the buyer's world, we have the journey they're on, we have our process that we're following as to execute. You need to operate in a process or you're just gonna have people running around doing whatever they want to. We have all these touch points in the middle that make up that buyer's experience, and the key is to have it mapped together. And that's what these tools, the buyer personas, the journey maps, that's what they can afford. Okay? So we're back now to our, our original premise, and we have all those touch points. Those are what is driving the digital experience there. So the content, The content is driving, this go-to-market strategy through the digital experience, to the revenue generation side. Okay. So any questions or thoughts before I kind of move on to the next part of things here? Yeah.
I kind of asked it in the last one.
Yep.
How are people getting that?
Sure. Hang on to that because next step is making it real. So we're going to go through exactly those things. Okay. All right. We'll forge ahead then. So making it real. So that was still a little bit abstract. Let's talk about how you actually do this work, right? And I have a great case study to talk about where I actually can't mention the name of the company. They are that big life sciences company. We've been working with them for about 18 months directly. And their goal going to this was direct contribution to revenue generation. This was a change for them, right? This was a marketing team that in 2015, their goals were all around lead generation. How many leads are you going to generate? How many marketing qualified leads are you going to generate, right? 2016, their goal was you have to have X% revenue contribution to the bottom line. And this is what prompted them to come out and seek Akunu and start to work with us because they said, to be able to do that, we need to understand way more than just lead generation. We need to understand these buyers way more throughout their journey. And they did have that aspiration as a marketing team to be more buyer-centric. The self-awareness at levels in that company that all they really talked about was their product, and they really needed to be broader than that and really need to think about their buyers better. So the first big task was developing an understanding of the audience. So now this starts to get to your question. And the development of personas and journey maps. So this is how we see the process of doing this that can lead to a really good result. And it starts with looking at the data, right? There's tons of data sitting out there. It doesn't have to be rich. It doesn't have to be complex. It can be your contact list from the CRM as a starting point. It can be your marketing automation leads as the starting point. And I'll show an example of this in a moment. And leading to the development of initial hypothesis. Everyone out there who's selling a product has an idea of who their buyer is. It might be wrong. It might be immature. It might be overly complex. But there is an idea to start with about who the buyer are that you can immediately start to validate with some of that data. Then we get into interviews and actual research, surveys, interviews together. One of the things I loved from the 3 presentations we heard so far today is Ardith, Robert, and Carla each mentioned the necessity of talking to people, of talking to customers. You can't understand them without talking to them. You can't, technology your way around it by using AI. Like you have to communicate with people. You have to talk to them in order to truly understand them. So starting with internal interviews is usually our recommendation. Start with the internal stakeholders, maybe some salespeople. This can be survey work as well. Then getting into the customer interviews, actually talking to representative people of those personas that hopefully at this point you've validated with some of the data, you've validated with some conversations internally, you've developed enough of a knowledge base so that you're credible when you go out and talk to people. And the fifth step here is aggregating that all together, synthesizing the results. Again, I would love it if we had a magic button to do that. But this is human work. This is thinking about this. This is the insights. This is the creativity to connect the dots here. And that's what leads you to your personas and journey maps. Okay? So we can dig in. We'll dig into a few of these points a little bit. But this is one of the starting points that we do with each one of our customers who's starting to use our marketing product. This is a report, a little heat map report that's created. And this is an analysis of that CRM data. So this is taking all the contacts in the database, running it through the algorithms that we've developed, and bucketing people into functional areas and seniority tiers, right? So this yellow dot right here, this represents your CIOs, your C-level IT people. This immediately gives you a sense of who is actually, say, in your leads, or who is actually in your sales interactions, or who is actually in your customer base. The blue dots here are overlaying the personas that this customer has defined there. And I would say that without exception, every time we have done this, there's some aha moment in looking at this data. It usually is one of 2 flavors, okay? The first flavor is oh oh my gosh, I had no idea that directors of IT were involved in our sales. Wow, maybe as a marketing team we should think about those guys and think about what kind of content they need, right? And then the other one, which is even more of one of these, is maybe you have a persona sitting here over no people. We were once working with a company that was in the logistics space. They spent 2 years focusing all of their marketing on CMOs, like all of their content, all their events, all their campaigns. We went and just did this. This took like 15 minutes to get the data and run it through here. They had never talked to a CMO in their entire life. There are 0 CMOs in their contact database, right? And they're sitting there going, no. So we have those aha moments, and this is just the first step here, right? So this is getting real about understanding who your personas are. Conducting surveys and interviews. Many different ways to go about this. You can do it yourself. You can do it with an agency. You can do it with a consultant. But fundamentally, it's thinking about who to survey, where to get information from. We like to use surveys with internal stakeholders. Like, it's a pretty safe environment to send something out to 100 people and look at the responses back. It's really good for validating, sometimes more than discovering. So surveys are an important tool here. And it's people with direct daily contact with the audience. One of the best cases that we've seen with this is a customer who used this out the entire sales team, got back, maybe they had 100 people in the sales team, 20 responses back, and then from that picked the 5 that seemed to be most engaged with this and led an internal workshop to get them there. So that was that was an approach I liked to this. Then the second thing is the customers, the recently acquired customers are always great. And I'd say that there's 2 things about, talking to customers, maybe 3, we'll see. But the first is that, people like to share their experiences. Like, if you're respectful of their time, like, I have not seen the case where customers have fought back about talking to someone for half an hour about why they bought your product and how they went about buying it. Okay, they're quite receptive to it. The second thing, and it's going to come up here later, is this is a point where engagement from the sales team and cooperation from the sales team, is almost an essential component to having this be a true kind of aligned persona exercise. And salespeople, they can be a little squeamish sometimes, about giving their contacts to the marketing team, and they'll probably want to sit on the calls, which is fine. But if you don't have buy-in from the sales team for developing buyer personas, you're only going to get so far with that. Arith and I were just talking about this last night. There's a lot riding on this in most organizations, and if you don't have that executive buy-in that this is a priority for marketing and sales to team up on, you gotta take stock of that situation. And then, what does a typical survey or a typical interview look like? We've got templates of questions and so on our website if you want to go look there sometime. But it's talking about these things, the goals, the process that buyer went through, the sources and types of information. Where did they seek content? What were the watering holes that they went to? What content sources? What events? And really trying to get into the idea of what were their concerns each step of the way. And that's why it's really powerful to get new customers where this stuff is all kind of fresh in their head. Okay. So here's my sales team statement here. And then the last step is synthesizing the data. So some of this is based on our experience of doing this work ourselves and working with customers. But one thing, again, is a truth every time, is that you learn something from the very first conversation that you have. The very first conversation you've had. Kathleen and I have both had the experience of sitting in a room with a marketing manager, maybe had been in the marketing profession for 5 or 8 years, being in the room with them when they made their first call ever to talk to a customer. Okay? First call ever. Right? So if you have any concerns about that, you get over that hump, because this is invaluable, right? So you learn things from the very first interview you have with the customer. After 2 or 3 interviews, you're going to start to hear some of the same things. You're going to start to pick up the themes. And after 5 or 6, you can start to sort through, okay, what are the commonalities here, and what's the noise? Okay. So even with 5 or 6 interviews, you're making real progress on understanding these personas. And then once you get past 7, you can look at it 2 ways. You can look at it and say, okay, we're hearing more of the same, which means we kind of got our core insights about this persona. So let's step forward. Let's go to the next persona or something. Or if you are, say, more further along in your own marketing maturity, this can actually be a point where you might be hearing all the same things that describe your persona, but now you're starting to pick up the anecdotes, the stories, like the quips, the insights that give you the richness to draw from when you get to actually creating content, when you get to your storylines and so on. So this is there's no hard and fast rules around this stuff, but we see that as an inflection point of like, okay, do we move on? Or is this worth us continuing to do work here and going deeper? So if we go to our case study now, when they came out of this audience research, they had 18 buyer personas. And Kathleen, how many did they have when they started? 52. Okay. We went in to sit down. They have 5 different product lines, each with a couple marketing people on them, all operating independently. Each had their own personas, which were like your name, name, rank, and serial number kind of personas. 52 of them, totally overlapping. They were all marketing to them independently, totally confusing their buyers, right? So that's what we stepped into. So over the course of a period of time, 52 down to the 18 that actually mattered. Not only was this the first time that some of these marketers had talked to customers, this was the first time the marketers had actually talked about this stuff amongst each other, right? So talk about like these moments of alignment within an organization, very overused word, but wow, like incredible. Altogether, there are over 500 research interactions that went into this. About, don't have the stats. 72 of them were interviews conducted over the phone. We had 370, which were surveys, some of those internal, some of them external. And then, don't overlook this when you go about doing this work, they had 50 existing voice of customer surveys or interview transcripts sitting around from some previous work the year before that they were also able to leverage in part of this. So you may not be starting from zero here. This kind of research just might be called something else, right? It might be called voice of the customer. It might be called your NPS surveys, which are for different purposes, but still might have some of the insights in there. The next step here, now that they had identified the personas and they had finally agreed that these are the buyers of our products, it was start to think about how do we operationalize around this. And one of the capabilities, actually, of our product that they are using is the ability to auto-tag their leads and contacts by best fit persona. Okay? So when someone fills out a form on the website, becomes a new lead, Akunu looks at it and says, okay, this best fits against this persona, second best fit against this persona. Okay? Kind of a meticulous process to do all the tuning on these algorithms, but got to the point where 71% of their leads and contacts are successfully tagged with the best fit persona. That's like the raw number on the raw data. So that includes all the missing titles, all the Mickey Mouses, like everything else in the data. So if you were to actually look at like true potential buyers, like that number is significantly higher than 71. And just to give a scale on this too, they have about 310,000 leads in their database. So this is operating with personas at scale so that can be operationalized. So think about that regardless of the size of your database, of having every one of your leads, every one of your contacts, associated with the best fit buyer persona for them. It leads right into, how are you going to nurture these folks? What is the content that you're going to, enable the sales team with, with these types of people and so on. Okay. And then the last piece here was the journey maps. So they went from thinking that every one of their buyers were unique and bought their product in their own unique way, to actually having 12 pretty well understood journey maps. So 5 product lines, a couple market segments for each product, led to 12 detailed journey maps here. So this was a great result for them. Kathleen and I both had the privilege of working with them kind of throughout this process and leading the journey mapping exercises here. And man, the light bulbs going off as they actually stopped thinking about like what did they do and what did the buyers do to buy a product. Really transformative for them. So the second step here is now that they had the personas, they have the journey maps, they have that strategic foundation, they've started to operationalize it on the data level. How do we get the rest of the value out of this? How does this start to really impact what we do as marketers? And they looked at it as as they typically do, on the funnel. It starts with the fact that marketing to two different personas, it is different. Camilla, the warehouse manager, is different than Henry, the director of IT. They're not going to like the same content, right? She's going to get bored with anything technical. He's going to call it all marketing fluff, if it's about the business cases. So understanding that and starting to tune content towards that is really important. What's their stat here? 2x the open rate and 5x the click-through rate. If you're starting to tune your content by the recipient persona. Okay. So the middle of the funnel, and if we go back to what was their original business goal, it was to have a quantifiable impact on revenue generation. This is where they saw their ability to do this kind of the highest, which was hey, let's take all this stuff that's kind of floating out there in the the marketing funnel and the sales pipeline, kind of matriculating itself through and going backwards and forwards and so on. And let's really be deliberate about how we engage with these people. So let's take our understanding of the buyer's journeys and let's use the buyer's needs, let's use their preferences, let's use their activities as a guide for what do we say to these people? Let's actually build buyer-centric messaging about our solutions rather than blasting product features out. Let's think about what format they want to consume the content in instead of writing monolithic, instructional white papers on topics. Let's think about our channels. They marketed on the website, they marketed in email campaigns, and they did events. Does it? They didn't really do webinars. They weren't really thinking social media. So this started to expand, how they were thinking as a marketing team. So this was from the demand gen report. So 20% increase in sales opportunities when leads are nurtured, with targeted content. That goes back to why it was important to them to get those leads tagged by persona, because that was just feeding right into their nurturing and their email marketing. And then the last part, the often forgotten part, is that marketing isn't selling a product. The sales team isn't just the only one selling a product. It's marketing and sales together. So the enabling sales, understanding what is the buyer looking for from the sales team through this process. Do they want a salesperson who's just an order taker? Do they want someone to help them figure out an entire solution for it? And those are two different scenarios that they were working with. So how do we best, as a marketing team, enable them? And what I have to say here is, if you guys, as the marketers, don't enable the sales team with great content, no one will. And what you will end up with? You will end up with this. Okay? I'm not even kidding. This is a slide that I intercepted between a salesperson and a prospect in a really big account. Okay? All right, these 6 pillars with the 6-fingered hand. So, need I say more about the importance of marketing enabling sales? Because you don't want this kind of stuff going out. Okay. It's funny. This was from 10 years ago, and I just went and searched for 6-fingered hand, and I am sure that's exactly the same picture that had been used. #1 Google result. So. There was, yeah. There's definitely a Princess Bride. I thought a Princess Bride motif for the entire presentation, but yeah. Okay. So now we're talking about content and the buyer's journey. So again, another important tool that we see in how to bring an understanding of the buyer into actually what you do as a marketing organization. So this is a content coverage map. And this is a screenshot from our product, so I'll just kind of explain what's going on here. It's our buyer's journey coming down. It's our personas. At each of the little nodes here, you see what their participation levels are. And you probably can't read the numbers, but it's indicating how many content assets do we have for this persona at this stage. Okay? So we highlight areas like, hey, this guy's a gatekeeper at this point, and we don't have any content for him. There might be an opportunity there. This might be a priority as we think about our content calendar for the next quarter. Let's plug these holes, because I guarantee if he's a gatekeeper and we don't have any content for him, what it means is someone, probably the salesperson, every deal is writing content to try to get through that part. Writing content to try to fill that buyer's needs at this point in time. As a marketing team, the opportunity is to actually craft that, have it align with your brand, have it align with your messaging, and fill that part of the buyer's journey with great, relevant content. Okay. Oh, here we go. Yeah, critical gap, missing content. Someone mentioned, I think, Ardith, did you mention reuse before? Yeah, so this is also a great opportunity to start to think about where content can be reused across the personas, especially when you start to think about intersecting it with the content formats that are preferred by the different people and the different stages and so on. So the opportunity to look for the overlaps, look for the reuse, look for the ability to maximize where your content creation efforts are going, and not have it just be yet another blog post for the top of the journey here, right? Not another product feature sheet for this part of the journey, right? You got to get them there first. Okay, so now, oops, that should say part 2. So now back to our case study. So they had their journey, they're starting to operationalize around it, they're starting to map their content, the existing content. That's the starting point, inventory what's going on out there. So they inventoried over 1,000 content assets across these different product lines, mostly from the website, and then all their PDFs, all their white papers and so on. They're in the process of tagging that to the journeys now so that they get those coverage maps and know where to invest their content development efforts. And the other big thing that happened here through this process was that shift in mindset, right? That, oh, let's think about the buyers and what they need. Let's think about their experience rather than what we are trying to achieve here. It impacted the content development. They expanded their content team. And now they actually, because they expanded, because they felt that they knew what they actually needed to do there now. Whereas before, if they added more content people, it would have been more of the same. Just chugging out the feature sheets and so on. But after doing the work, they were like, okay, we actually know what we need to do here. We need this richer formats, different types of content higher in the journeys. And here is an example of that, where these are actually, I did like a presentation with one of the marketing people there, and this was her example. I just changed the colors on the boxes. So this is how they thought about a campaign previously. They're like, we're going to do a white paper campaign. And they had one of their scientists write a dense 20-page white paper talking about how their box did this. Okay? That's how they thought about campaigns. And they put it out there, generated leads, and got scored based on how well they did. Now that they went through the buyer's journey and started to understand what the personas actually needed, how they thought, what they were looking for, what they were interested in, and what they were concerned about as they're going through a purchase, this is how she's thinking about it now, right? So now it's like, well, we weren't even thinking about like where their head is at the top of the journey here. We're basically going at them like they've already decided to buy our product, and we're educating them more about it. So a richer set of activities. Now they're starting to get into webinars. Now they're starting to do some. Well, I guess it's still based on the white paper, but a flow now, that continuity of experience between white paper to product pages, and not just having the PDF be a PDF version of the product stuff on the website, and really thinking through the flow more. Okay, so this was a big deal. Like this was such a big deal that this idea came out of this marketing group that this presentation was actually across their whole their whole parent company's group of companies, right? So this was a big deal. A traditional company, someone actually changing the paradigm in how they were working. Now the last part here is really to drive the digital experience for this team, right? They've got the journey maps done, they've got the personas, they're getting their coverage maps in order, they've made the shift in mindset that it's about the buyer, it's about their experience. And the next steps for them are to get to where they want to be with a digital experience that drives business results. So they are relaunching the website. They're a big company, so this has been like a 14-month project so far. Very informed by the buyer's journeys, right? That was like a must-have. We got to figure out the buyers and the buyer's journeys before we can adequately finish the website. Like they were still in brochureware land with how they approached the website. Big shift there. Second thing is I shouldn't even say ongoing, the increased content development going on, hiring actual editorial people, into the marketing team. This isn't just product marketers churning out the feature sheets anymore. They actually have people, with the journalism backgrounds, finding the stories, creating the storylines. This company has an amazing history that they need to connect, like HP was trying to figure out how to connect it with what we're currently doing. So that's their opportunity here too. And the last thing is, when it all comes together, it's the dynamic, personalized experiences. Personalized for them, it will be, driven by persona. It's not going to be, hi Jeff, welcome back kind of stuff. That will be enabled through connecting the Kunu piece, doing the persona identification matching, with their Salesforce and Pardot components where they're managing their marketing and sales processes with their CMS to do the actually delivery around. So we're into a real kind of technology integration. And one of the reasons why I love this story at this conference is this is what we got impeded by, 7 years ago at Clickability. We had the technology to be able to do this. Like we had a module in our content management platform that could profile visitors and put targeted content in front of them based on who they were, what stage were they at in the purchase cycle, like this whole right content to the right people at the right time. But no one knew what was the right content, who were the right people, and what was the right time. Okay? So it's this sort of foundational work about understanding the buying audience, really getting into the personas, the journeys, mapping that into the content translation. And then the rest is technology. And that kind of takes care of itself, as technology has developed. All right. Did that help put some of the details around for your previous? Okay, good. Like I said, lots of great resources out there. Our website has a resources part. Just go search for things and you will find the help you need in those areas too.
Is anyone doing anything with sharing some of these stories kind of almost outside of marketing and sales to other parts of the organization, including senior management and people who touch the customer with support?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When you think about, like, we'll look at it in two ways. One is like how do you do the research and get the insights and so on. Support, in our work has been part of those conversations at time. And then on the output side, this work around the personas, and how they buy. I mean, this has a direct bearing on revenue generation, and the marketers that we've worked with who have accomplished this, like, this is a big deal. To share this organizationally, to share it with the CEO, to share it with the executive team, and you definitely end up in those situations where, just like our little bubble chart, like there's eye-opening moments on this. It was that logistics company that had focused 2 years, right, focused on the CMO, only to realize that was not their buyer. So, yeah. Yes.
Is there any sort of rule of thumb how often one should revisit their buyer personas?
Yeah, good question. Lots of different opinions on that. In some ways, it depends on your marketplace and how dynamic things are. The guidance that we usually give our customers is once you've built them, you've done your 7, 8, 9, 10 interviews to get the initial version done. Check in, every quarter or so, even if it's just 1 or 2 calls. And you might just hear it's validating what you already know, but you might pick up the thread of something that's changing in the marketplace. And it's definitely a more traditional mindset would be that you do them at the beginning of the year, you roll them out at sales kickoff, and then the PDFs just go sit somewhere. It needs to be a little bit more alive than that. I don't know, Arith, do you have any recommendations you usually give to people? Yeah, good.
They do, they need to be revisited, and so, for example, I have a client where we created personas a couple of years ago, and just last year found out there was a new role in play, and one of the roles that had been one of the stronger roles had gone away. So things had shifted that much in one industry they told you that we had to develop a whole new persona, retire a different one, and rethink the content storyline.
Yeah. Yeah,
Have to stay on top of it.
That's a great example, and for us, we have a sales product too, which the sales operations person is one of the buyers. That role is in the process of evolution right now. So a year ago, that persona would have looked like the person who stitches all the systems and the data together. A very tactical, just plug-in stuff together role. What that role will be a year from now is a strategic person on the sales team that figures out how to make decisions that make the operations more efficient and so on, but it's transitional right now. So in our own selling, we are going to end up with 2 sales ops personas, one more traditionally oriented and one more future oriented, and just kind of keep checking in on that one, much more than checking in on the VP of sales, right? Yeah.
I have a question. Have you seen a need to do a version of personas based on the growing millennial population becoming more decision makers versus the older time decision makers who are the more senior people?
Yeah, we've definitely picked up those trends. And I'd say we've picked, I think we picked them up in 2 ways. On the persona side, in understanding their patterns of content consumption and where they seek information. Usually it's the single persona, but kind of annotated like, you have this flavor of content consumption and then this flavor of content consumption. The other really big place is on the actual buyer's journey and the way that a decision happens. So I think that this is related to the growing size of the buying committee. Way more consensus type of decisions being made, way more people being brought in for buy-in, and way fewer people who are just going out, taking a stand, taking the risk, and making a bold decision about a purchase decision.